and talk is about architects who are trying to or have become public artists, and the work that they are making and the way that they are making it. And a little bit of history about how architects got involved in what could be considered public art in the world. This is an old project by an architect, Laura. No, I should put her name on the slide. It was done at Creative Time in the 1980s in a project called Art on the Beach. And what you are seeing is a giant megaphone, which unfortunately you are not seeing, is pointed directly at the World Trade Center as a way for artists, and in this case architects, to explore that idea of having a public voice, having a way to talk to those in power, but of course with a kind of ironic, impossible gesture of the megaphone, the desire for it and the impossibility of speaking. And that's one of the most important things about public art, that it has this difference. In other words, it's not required to have a pure point of view, because that would be like propaganda. That would be like, this is the government saying to its citizens, this is what you should think or how you should think. That the good public art always has this relationship of mixed messages and mixed thinking, so that there's a complexity to what's happening as you contemplate the work, or in this case, participate in the work. Okay, great. Okay, so let's start. How did they get interested? Basically, up until the 1980s, no architects participated in public art, except you'll see just a very few architects who basically did their own public art for buildings that they designed, as opposed to being commissioned to public art. In the United States and pretty much everywhere else in the world where public art was something that was commissioned, it was specifically commissioned via people who were in the museum or curatorial, and they only commissioned artists. Architects in some legislation is actually prohibited from doing public art in the United States. But in 1980 at the Venice Biennale, we see the kind of the curatorial point of view to bring postmodernism out into the open. And there was this street of design. Every architect was given a certain amount of linear space in which to create a facade. And this facade opened, this exhibition opened the idea that architects could be much more creative and much more, not creative, but much more focused on the pure aesthetic experience. And in this case, in many cases at this time, in the symbolic aesthetic experience. And so because of the dramatic publicity around this, because this is the first architecture biennale in Venice, it began this idea and added to the possibility of architects doing what is traditionally more looking like actually an artist's interpretation. You can go back, of course, to the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, and you have the follies that are designed by architects to be kind of things in the landscape and to coordinate with their landscape or with their landscape design, and usually have some kind of direct reference which you can understand. One is the kind of giant grotto mouth. The other one is the pineapple, which is of course a symbol of happiness and good and welcoming. And then this kind of odd kind of pyramidal shape, which the pyramids were important to the Masons among other groups as a kind of symbolic form. So these sit in the landscape, making a kind of point or a focus, and that have that kind of idiosyncratic and symbolic nature. Of course, there's also embellishment. And I am right now praying I didn't upload the wrong ones. We'll see, because there's not the right text on here. So you have embellishment. So of course we have Louis Sullivan, we have Sinan, Myanmar Sinan, and we have a church from Argentina that embellishes the work, so that architects, in fact, use their aesthetic discipline as an embellishment of buildings themselves. There has been a long tradition of architects making memorials. The series in the bottom left-hand corner are from Yugoslavia, which had a large number of what some would call brutalist work in terms of monuments. The one in the right-hand corner is a memorial to John F. Kennedy by Philip Johnson in in Dallas. And then you have the famous Vietnam War Memorial by Maya Lin, which you'll see more of lately, in the future here, I hope. Here are like the modern architects that did some work. You have Corbusier sculpture from India with the open hand. You have Oscar Niemeyer's kind of clothespin type shape. You have a mural by Brazilian Burl Marx, who is primarily known as a landscape architect, but did a lot of paintings and murals. And then you have Philip Johnson's work that's in Cincinnati, one of the very last things he ever made in his lifetime, which I find very interesting because for me, Philip Johnson is a kind of curator architect. In other words, he's making architecture to kind of push the field forward, not necessarily being brilliant at doing that, although I'm sure he was proud of his work. And so I find it interesting that the last thing he does in his career in 1999 is to create 4 or 5 sculptures in Cleveland. And so it's almost like I'm even pushing into the future. I'm not even going to be there. But somehow I have this sense that architects will be more engaged in a pure aesthetic experimentation through public art or other forms. Just a quick, we're going to talk at the lecture on next Tuesday. We will be talking much more about James Wines, an architect in New York City that worked with his group was called SITE. They are best known for the best discount shopping stores, which no longer exist, in which he created about 10 of these unique stores that had some kind of bizarre way to enter the store or the way that the building was built. In this case, every morning, the actual corner of the store actually pulls back in which to let people into the store, and then closes at night by sliding forward to lock the store into a direct box again. You can see a couple of other pieces. One is in Vancouver, Canada, which is part of the exhibition for a World Expo, in which in the roadway you have all these people upside down, and then actually a project for a best store, which is these asphalt covered cars which are buried in the ground. So he is a pure architect, but he explored and entered into this area. In his talk at SciArc in 1980, which is very interesting to listen to, I'll give you all the links to see it. He designates a difference between art and design. For him, art was spontaneous, included no pragmatic issues, and revealed something about the subconscious of the maker and of people, not just of the maker, but of the culture as a whole. Whereas to him, design was to solve a project with aesthetic integration. So he's not saying, he's saying that you're trying to make something like a chair, like a orange peeler, whatever it is you're trying to make, right? And if you're doing design in his methodology, you're not just being strictly pragmatic, but you also are engaging your aesthetic sense, and the aesthetic sense is judged along with the ability of that thing to do whatever it's supposed to do. He also believed, I don't believe this is quite so true today, but that also design had no cultural objectives. It existed within the market economy, and it just only made those things which look like the things that people want to have, or the new things they want to have, rather than stressing any kind of change to move forward, to do anything to send a message or send some kind of information forward. So in this way, you see how Wines differentiated between what he did, which he considered art. It was spontaneous with no pragmatic value, and revealed some kind of subconscious issue. Like he says that the cars in the asphalt, which were much more popular than the buildings, and people would come out and see them. It reveals that subconscious, not so subconscious love of the automobile. And whereas design did not do anything except beautifully, in the best version, beautifully solve the design project and issue. So, so just carry that forward as you see these things. And first I'm going to go through the festivals and exhibitions which have brought this forward to the world in the last 20 years. And one of the beginning Hi, come on in. One of the beginning projects in which artists and architects were encouraged to collaborate with each other was Art on the Beach in New York City in the 1980s, where eventually Battery Park City is built, but at the time was just a sand-covered infill area on the edge of Manhattan. And Creative Time, which is a nonprofit, they got permission to do installations every summer for a number of years. And you're also seeing the two cantilevered elements coming forward. They also got permission. This is inside the Brooklyn Bridge, inside the big columns that come down is in fact an open space. And they got permission from the city to allow them to do art installations in that space in the Brooklyn Bridge. The two bottom ones are by Elizabeth Diller and deal with her sensibility at that time, which had to do with all architecture had to do with this kind of balance and of the human body. The one on the right is actually the ticket booth for coming into Creative Time. There's the human body is inside there. You can just see a tiny bit of the body as it reaches out the hand to take your money in order to come forward. But the human body and also her sense of gravity and gravitylessness, which she uses, is you can see that kind of coming into being in her early years. PS1 MoMA in 2000 started a thing called basically they were designing these architectural elements to turn this outdoor space into weekend party spaces as part of the way to build an audience for this old school that had been converted to a museum. These are some of the works that came out of that 20-year experiment. These are all designed by architects with the instinct for some kind of artistic attribute. Very few of them have any functional necessity or role. Several of them, like the one in the upper right-hand corner, are playful and create a sense of play. This one by Moss, I think I showed you that in his in their work sample and Meredith's work last week, just as this kind of interior space and architectural form, which was very experimental and had to be built out of like cloth and bent poles because that's all they knew how to do at that time. In England, during basically the same time period, the Serpentine Gallery, which is a very upper class gallery and for some reason has a building in a city park in London, started to commission every year what they called the Serpentine Pavilions. They usually open I think they open in June every year and like close down in October, and then they're destroyed and another architect comes in and which to do the work. You're seeing here, you're seeing Cool House and Cool House with the big round inflatable and Kerr on the bottom right hand. Not that's not correct. I should mark these down. So anyway, you're seeing 3 of these experiments that have to do with making this covered space, and most of the spaces were supposedly designed, and more they become later, really to make sure they're places for coffee as a place to hang out. But you can see this provide an opportunity for architects to experiment with different ways without a functional point of view. Coachella, since about 2015, has been commissioning architects to do and artists to do large scale installations. One of the things that Coachella does is, although the architects does the drawings and explains how to make them, the architects has no role in the making. They actually make them for them. Here you're seeing Andrew Kovacs with the giant cactus, and you're seeing Francis Kerr with the tall cones. Here are some more of the Coachella projects by architects. Burning Man has had a limited engagement with architects, but there are some that have done work, both the one on the left with the kind of staircase, the one on the right is actually done by Burkhart Ingalls, big. But most of the things that you see at Burning Man, which are these kind of temple forms, are in fact not done by an architect, but by a sculptor who's been doing them many, many years at Burning Man. Before then they are burned on the last day. SciArc has a pretty good running history of seeing experimental works by architects in their galleries and commissioning that work, or, well, probably not commissioning, I shouldn't say that, just allowing the architect to spend their money in order to make these things and display them. And they've been very aggressive in terms of much more contemporary fabrication technologies in order to make the forms and the things that are exhibited in the galleries. This was part of this reason, part of this little talk also addresses why it is that architects have moved forward so frequently. Some people in the field of public art believe that the Great Recession of 2007 and 8 is what caused young architects to explore this field and to find a way to make money because they didn't have any buildings to build or to work on, or they had been laid off by larger firms that they worked in. And therefore they brought to public art techniques from the architectural field which are not used at all by artists. They are used by fabricators, but not by artists. So the smooth transition between between design and fabrication, artists cannot do, because that's just not part of what, not they can't do it, but it's not part of their education. It's not part of the way that typically they work in the United States or pretty much anywhere. So they started to use these technologies. You can see Mr. Joseph Choma's piece on the bottom left-hand side, and the pieces by the, I will have to get all these, I know all these names, but they're not coming to me. The one on the bottom right-hand is actually a new sign, a very new signage in Santa Monica or Hollywood in California. That utilize, of course, computer-aided design in order to produce the work, whatever kind of software they may have been using to transfer. Of course, then they have utilized parametric thinking and parametric conceptualization. You see here Jenny Sabin with the kind of stretch fabric piece, and Mr. Diaz on the one with the one on the bottom with the red and the white. And then this one is by one of your architecture professors here.
Professor Dustin White.
Yes, in terms of the work. 3D printing, of course, is continues to get more and more sophisticated. So again, architects could bring 3D printing to the fore in order to make things that were then designed, which would take immense amount of time to actually do by hand. And yeah,
I hope I don't want to interrupt or anything. That top one there, that was 3D printed?
It was 3D printed. Yes, I checked it myself. Yeah.
That is insane.
It is. It's a Deeds piece. It's some small piece that she did, and it is 3D printed.
May I ask where that that building is, or like what that project is?
Well, you can see the little symbol there, so it was at the Biennale in Venice, but I can't tell you.
I
what
apologize
year.
for interrupting, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. No, please, do interrupt at any time. So, I mean, obviously, it may have spent some time being finished, you know, grinded down into some form as opposed to just happening perfectly. Of course, the architects were very good at, and still are good at utilizing, various cutting techniques, multiple pieces that are put together, which allow for large scale things to be made at really a cost-effective way, which artists cannot really compete with because they don't really think in this fashion in terms of it happening now. Now there are many that do. I mean, there's now this like transition happening, but especially at the very beginning, it was very surprising to people who wanted to have larger scale work as part of their public art events, and architects provided the opportunity to make that happen at a reasonable cost. There are new fabrication techniques. These are out of Germany. These are inflatable. These are solid steel. So they are actually inflatable forms. They are not soft forms. Once they are inflated into the shape, they stay in that shape. But there is a problem. I'll go ahead and say that. The problem with architectural education related to architects, which create some kind of difficulties for the kind of industry as a whole in terms of what is put out for the public, how this kind of public art does things. And generally, architects are not taught the following things, which are crucial elements to artist work. They are not taught about color at all. They are not taught about the principles of composition, how you compose one element against another. They don't really use collage because they tend to create buildings which are made out of one material with one way of thinking, as opposed to collaging with an artist will collage things together, which may not be in the same realm. The touchability of the work tends to be diminished compared to artist work. Artists are very used to the hand touching the work, and architects are not so engaged in that. So works can be, in some cases, almost dangerous, but that's not really the problem. The problem is they're just not designed to be touched in terms of the work. Architects are not educated in narrative structures or cultural symbolism. In other words, how do you make things which tell stories or represent the symbols of your culture, which might be engaged, right? They are not really taught this, and it doesn't matter whether you are at FAU or at Harvard or at any other school in the world. These are true. And of course, they're not taught art theory as opposed to architectural theory. And art theory is a much more sophisticated way of thinking about things in the world, and architecture theory is generally seen. Yes.
So I had a question. Architects aren't taught much of this.
Yeah.
That being said, are there any like classes or solutions that are available to kind of cover what is not taught?
Well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to do a little bit on color and composition myself with you all, but I can only just do like it exists. Here you go, right? So generally the answer is no. When I was a architecture student at Columbia, I fought and got special permission to take art courses with the Masters of Fine Arts program. And was actually exhibited in their final, show, but I was the only person doing that.
Wow.
To make that happen. So no, these are things that if you want to learn, you need to do them on yourself. Narrative structures and cultural symbols are a little bit better today. I think you could find those, but still, but you're not going to see it you're not going to see it in any work really of any substantial amount. Okay, so some of these notions are kind of silly by me, but they are consistent among architects working worldwide. So you can see those possibilities. Although architects generally don't know how to use color, They either use them in one way, the whole building or whatever they're making, the structure is all red or yellow or whatever, one color, or they tend to just use a band of colors. They just do a whole bunch of colors. But not in a very sophisticated way, not in like the way artists know how to tone things down, how to make things match, how to make them come together or contrast. They tend to be just kind of a direct application of the colors and forms. Architects, when they do public art, they love circles. You can see this kind of swimming area in Europe. This group called SPY, which does a lot of these big circles out there in the world. There's a piece of the standing fins is a circle of fins in Denver or in Colorado. So circles are when architects or landscape architects think about doing something artistic, suddenly circles arrive. One of the goofiest ones is sticks. In other words, in order to, at a lower cost, create a bigger field of impact, they tend to use sticks. And so there are many more examples of these in terms of creating this field and form and shape. You can see here we have a cube, we have a cylinder, and we have a triangle, all made by just utilizing multiple sticks, which also relate to a kind of simple way to do, repetitive fabrication or repetitive techniques in the construction. Not that many architects, but some use sign-like techniques. You're seeing here one by, there's 3 different artists here. They basically use laser cut technologies or water jet, and then powder coated is the kind of technique of preference in order to maintain their durability. But this is a very simple way that architects can enter the field. You see when architects are kind of younger and just getting into it, they can use this technology because it's very straightforward in terms of the making. When they do sculpture kinds of things, sometimes they frequently do just in large forms. So here you have on the bottom left, you have Frank Gehry's fish from the 80s in Japan. You have Hadid and Drogan's dog in Colorado, which has also made all of dog tags. And one of the better public artists in the world, Christoph Muller, with the giant nails, which is in Washington State. A lot of excellent works by Muller. House forms are sometimes used by architects as sculptural elements. You're going to see more of the little house of Hollywood. That's by Andrew Kovacs. I'm going to show you more of his work soon. Because of the software capabilities of architects as opposed to artists, the ability to to use curvilinear shapes and to control where those are and to control those during the manufacturing of the work itself is possible. So curves at a large scale have entered art, which generally was not done at any kind of large scale among other artists in the world. Architects tend to repeat things. In other words, they come up with using something and then they repeat it in order to build the form up. This is the one of the all the little silver balls hanging off this is a parking garage in Santa Monica. It's kind of well known in California by Ball and Nagers. They're 2 young, well, they're not so young anymore, architects to make this kind of shape by tensile holding them into place. Or, this kind of simple, just go to the store, get the plastic chairs and then put them into a form. So this kind of architects tend to repeat to make their forms out of repetition, which generally artists do not do. Stacking is again another art element of artists, in which you can either make it a consistent form, or stacking tends for some reason to allow the architects to use kind of diverse forms or diverse shapes in terms of putting elements together. Walls, of course, classic architectural element. Many of them, like the yellow ones in the bottom left-hand corner, are in public spaces, places where people walk through and then read through the structures. Or now, especially lately in the bottom right-hand corner, using a lot of light so that if a wall is introduced, it tends to also have a nighttime attribute. Up until definitely in the last 15 years, the #1 architectural form used by architects to make public art is what I call the inverse trumpet shape. You see here, the bottom left-hand corner is by Snøhetta. The bottom right-hand corner is in Egypt. And somewhere in the US is the silver one. But this shape, this inverted trumpet shape that reaches up to the sky, is just the most popular form among architects to make things happen. And they frequently merge. They can either be singular or they can be in groups in order to make forms happen. So they kind of have like a tree form without having to involve the landscape architect, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of people in D8 that are trying to use that kind of like that trumpet
Right.
kind of idea, and they're like using that for like even I at one point was using it for inspiration.
So actually, I was in Argentina and I interviewed Martin Harand, and his latest piece is also one of these. And he was very disappointed when I told him that, it's the most single-use form in the world by architects. It was used differently, and of course, it's not the same, but still, that was kind of odd. But he was a good guy. We had a good laugh about that. And another popular form among architects are mirrors. So they frequently occur in many places. You even see it here just by using mirror surface stainless steel on the trumpet shape. You get the kind of mirror forms, but architects much more. Artists only use mirror surfaces in very particular instances when they actually want to use it as a mirror, like you see yourself or you see others, not as a kind of visual form in the landscape. It's something that architects have brought to the table. There are a number of architects that are doing kind of pure sculptural work, but I think you can see the use of technology in which to create the fabrication of these elements. And then there is this strange little circuit in which a number of African-American architects are using black as the triangular one was in Venice. That's by David Adey. And the one at the top is by Felice Davis at the Museum of Modern Art. And now I am forgetting the other one, which is in St. Louis. She's amazing. I should have her name memorized. But this is a kind of oddball thing. But as you think about it, black has never really been used as a kind of, definitely white or red brick or much more the kind of standard architectural material. So I think it makes sense that this has come forward as an experimental process. So here are a few architects. I think I picked like 4 to kind of look at more comprehensively in terms of their work. This is Maya Lin, who you may or may not know. She won the competition for the Vietnam War Memorial when she was a student at Yale at about 22 years of age. The piece was roundly disliked by the media after the selection panel selected it. But then when it was actually finished and the way the public reacted, that is the Vietnam vets and their families, to the piece, they loved the piece. They loved looking for their family names. They loved living the flowers and the way that it takes place, but also that it had this way of encompassing people in the earth. And feeling like you were in a special place, even though you were on the National Mall, in Washington. She has gone on to a tremendous career in public art, a limited career in architecture. Here are a few pieces. She's done a few of these kind of snake drawings in the landscape. This one I think is in London or in the UK. In the bottom right-hand corner is these wave forms that she's done both at famous sculpture gardens, and there's a similar one at the Miami Federal Courthouse. Yeah.
So it seems like she does a lot of like landscape stuff.
Yes.
Is there any like, I mean, this is probably a dumb question, but like, what are the qualities that she can get from working strictly with the landscape instead of like, constructing something?
This is her art. I don't know, I've been to a couple of the earth ones. They're very big.
Mhm.
So each of these bumps would be half the size of this room. So although they're usually in kind of, museum settings, you don't see too many kids rolling down them and that kind of stuff.
Nice.
But they are kind of interesting forms.
Absolutely, this is super nice.
And then the one on the bottom, that is there's a park in Manhattan called Madison Square, which does 2 or 3 art installations each year in the park. And she brought in 100 dead trees, okay? And she put them in the park.
Wow.
As part of a statement about, trees are still being killed every day all around the world, right? Just to have this kind of experience of these dead tall trees in the park itself, and have that feeling of being in the kind of treeless forest, which also doesn't really exist in Manhattan in that way. So I think it probably was a powerful piece, although I didn't see it myself. And then she does art installations. And I just thought that, her way of combining kind of, her architectural heritage in terms of its grid and combination of making things. So you see these wood forms that she's made as a sculpture that is wood and gridded, but at the same time is clearly like a mountain. And then the one in the bottom left-hand corner. And then the other one is made, almost like cobblestones. And I think one of the things that she brings that traditional architects, I think, would be good to try to do more is you can see that things are imperfect in the way that it's laid out, right? Each of the blocks does not actually line up. It actually kind of comes up in a special way. And so I think that's a way to add a kind of intimacy of detail and a kind of biophilic feeling about it that isn't used very much by architects when they could in fact introduce that into the building. So I'm trying to look at also what these forms could do. She's more of the pure artist. Her buildings are very simple, the few that she's done. This is Andrew Kovacs that I showed you earlier. Here's the big cactus at
Coachella.
At Coachella. Sorry, thank you. Here are a few pieces. The one in the Polaroid is in Mexico. The one in with the trees is in Georgia, near Atlanta. And then the one with the man sitting in it, that's in Boynton Beach. You can see it on Congress Avenue if you want to. He's basically just using linear color compositions. And he is, unlike many of the other architects, he's trying to figure out, and I think understands how to use color in a complex way to make a field of things. He also did the stacked things in Saudi Arabia and the new project that's at Hollywood, where he got permission to build this kind of ghost image of a house in green. I don't know how many of you know, but Hollywood was a housing development. That's what the sign was for. by putting the house back underneath the Hollywood sign. He's reinforcing what that sign was about, that it wasn't about, movies and stars and all that. It was just about people buying and selling middle-class homes. And it used to say Hollywood land, but the land fell down and they didn't rebuild it in that way. You can see also in the upper right-hand corner, it's a little hard to see, maybe it's better there. You can see the little bulldog among all the, having his choice of where to pee on the, but he has done a lot of designs which are based on kind of toy thinking. This is actually a dog park design that he created, which is, which allows the kind of symbolic memory of the dog and the peeing on the, this relationship, this kind of joke relationship with a fire hydrant in urban areas, rather than just an open area where the dogs run and play, that there's something more that the designer is bringing to the table. Olaf Ellison, he started out as a designer and a pure artist, but in the last 10 years has opened an architectural firm. Which is the same, you'll see the next one, Thomas Heatherwick has done exactly the same thing, opened an architectural firm. These are his early works. You see, I don't know if any of you happen to remember, you might have not even been born yet. So in New York, in the East Side and the East River in New York City, he installed 5 waterfalls on scaffolding. So in a way, it was a simple project. You put up scaffolding, you put big pipes up to the top, and you pump water out of the East River and over the edge in order to make these waterfalls happen.
You made them out of scaffolding?
Yeah, well, yes, yeah.
I like that.
They were up for about 6 months, and you could go take a boat. You could probably take an expensive tour boat, or you could just take a ferry and go see them across the river. But how to introduce this kind of phenomenological form, this kind of experience that was not normal. The one with the orange sun and the orange letter, that's the Tate Museum in England. This was a very popular installation with the large yellow glowing light and then mist that was part of, that made sure it would always have this misty feeling inside. And if you don't know, if you take a space with this particular kind of light, it deadens color. So basically when you're in it, you're also in this kind of environment of black and white. When you're actually in the space. He did a whole bunch of hallways in the Museum of Modern Art once with the yellow light, which I went in. It is really weird to all of a sudden look at everyone and they're just all in grays rather than colors in the world. Although New Yorkers, of course, just dress in black and white. That's all they have. So he was doing this work, but now this is kind of the architectural work that he's been doing. This kind of little exhibition space out in the water.
It seems like a dramatic shift. This seems
Yeah.
like a very drastic shift.
No, well, he wanted to do it. Yeah. Because they had a show once that I saw, and they brought his studio in almost. They brought in all the stuff he has in his studios, and they just make piles of shelves, and he had all these things, all these different shapes, all these different forms, these geometries, these lights, all this stuff. It was kind of like he was willing to think at any scale. But, people had only given him so much possibilities. The one that's in Denmark, the one that's the colored, that's a view of the city, but you walk around and the city, of course, changes colors depending on where you're looking out.
That's super cool.
In terms of the space itself. And then the freestanding stairs, although freestanding stairs have started to become they've kind of come in the last few years as a thing in the world.
I mean, the vessel kind of mimics that, right? The freestanding stairs
What?
and such. The vessel in New
The
York.
vessel,
does,
yes, it's another one of the freestanding stairs, but there are other ones in Europe also. Then these are 3 projects that he's done as an architect. So this this is a building where he did the entire facade out of this kind of trying to make the facade into a series of crystals that lit up the space and provided this kind of bizarre, almost like kind of looking at. The one on the bottom right is in California. It is just a place at a museum to kind of hang out and enjoy the colored ceiling and the light. And the one in the upper right-hand corner is in Cleveland Museum. He took a courtyard that had been an open air space and converted it to an enclosed space and added a few buildings. You can see him using the trumpet shape here in order to hold up the building, hold up the ceiling. Mark Fornes. The bottom right-hand one is in Tampa, Florida. He is one of the first people to really utilize new technologies and new design software in order to make his work. He started in the 80s and in the 90s with more primitive stuff and has worked his way up in terms of the technology. All his work is made by putting small pieces together. Some of them have internal structures, but many of them don't need it in terms of the way that he works with engineers to make it happen.
This is one of the people that we're also kind of looking at when it comes to D8.
Okay.
This is exactly like you said, the small pieces that form.
These are newer works that he's made. That's amazing. And then these are, this is like a Louis Vuitton store on the left as an interior. The one on the right is the big air shaft in a cruise ship. I mean, where the elevators are and and then a entrance pavilion. These on here you see him trying to use more color, but he's not confident. It's kind of a little bit crude in terms of his work.
How can you tell?
What?
How can you tell?
It's my opinion.
Oh.
Okay. It's not, that's my opinion, that he is not completely mature in understanding in terms of how to use color. I think he is mature in terms of how to use color, in terms of like the yellow one making the pattern, the yellow and blue one, but in terms of the real intensity of the color, either one reinforcing each other, or bringing out the art form in a particular way. I don't see that much strength in it in terms of the work. And then there's Heatherwick, which if you know Heatherwick, you probably don't know this work. This is his work from the 90s, in which he was just a young guy trying to build a reputation for himself in the UK. He's not educated as an architect. He's educated as an industrial designer and a furniture designer, which is how he started. Probably the best known piece is this piece that he did for a commercial real estate development, which is the bridge that folds and unfolds. So when you come there on either side, you can push a button and then the thing will fold so you can walk across. And then I don't know how much time it is until it refolds up, gives you enough time to cross. So one of his more famous works, the one that looks like a explosion, which is actually called Bang, unfortunately failed structurally and was destroyed. The people that commissioned it finally decided not to bother to try to keep it alive anymore. And the one that's at the bottom left-hand corner looks like a crown. It actually folds in on itself, so that it becomes much more like a diamond shape formality. So that's kind of where he got started, which it has really very limited architectural issues. Here we have the vessel and a restaurant that's in the UK in terms of the new work.
That's super interesting. He started off as an industrial designer.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
And then all this work is from China. So the Thousand Tree Projects, then the one on the bottom is a symphony hall, music hall, and then the one on the top you're not seeing very well. They actually did design the entire, it's a shopping mall he designed the entire shopping mall in addition to this kind of flowery shape that comes out of the center. For me, Heatherwick, I mean, when he was back here, I loved his work, what he was trying to do. I think as he's gotten involved in architecture, he's definitely on this border of ugliness. And I'm not quite sure exactly, you know, where it's going. It seems, and that's one of the things I'm going to talk about in another future lecture is really, is beauty important anymore, or is it just the fact that it's unique and new and eye-catching and different? In other words, we stop judging things based upon a kind of timeless quality, but more, is it something we haven't seen before? And therefore we're attracted to it in some way, which I think comes with social media, because it's very hard to, in social media, to show something that's really beautiful and why it's really beautiful. That's a very difficult task. To show that it's something new or different, or people are interacting with it in a different way, that's an easy task in terms of the work. And just to finish up here, these are just some projects from Florida, in case you want to go out there and do a tour of architects, you know, making public art. Here's the Disney Hotel by Michael Graves with its giant fish and scallops and Disney characters on the outside of the building. This is Frank Gehry's New World Symphony with which I consider a work of art, both these entrance pieces and then this piece that looks like it's kind of, you know, opening to the wind in Miami Beach. These are some other just various pieces around Florida. The one that's the painted fish is another artist, a graffiti artist, did Philip Stark's fish, which has been there for years. There's the Perez Museum with the hanging plants, which I would consider the hanging plants a work of public art. Last time I was there, they were in terrible shape. I hope they have returned. I don't know if anyone's been there recently. And right across the street from the basketball arena is Burl Marx' kind of largest plaza piece outside of South America. So if you happen to be down there, please, I've been there a zillion times and I never noticed this until I was looking around what could possibly be out there in Florida. And Burl Marx, if you don't know his work as a landscape architect, the work is just very beautiful in terms of kind of converting landscapes into paintings, contemporary paintings. These are some follies here in South Florida. You have Lapidus's funny follies that are on Lincoln Road. There are 8 or 9 of them, all of them a different structural system in concrete as a kind of architectural tour of how architecture is made in concrete. You have Architectonica's piece across the street here at the bus station, Bill Lane's lifeguard stands from the 1990s, and then just recently completed Margie Galvanic's view platform of over the Everglades in Tamarack. Sculpture has been made. The one in the upper right is Jeffrey Hoover's sculpture that's in Pembroke Pines. I think Pembroke Pines, maybe Miramar. Hope I'm not confused there. And then Jeffrey, the one with the silver one, he goes by single name, Jeffrey. He went from being, I knew him 20 years ago, he went from being a landscape architect calling me up about how he could convince people to do more art and, you know, and the landscapes that he was designing for this company. And finally, he just gave up and he just said, well, I'm just going to do the art. So he has become an unbelievably successful artist. He took advantage of his Filipino roots and has done humongous sculptures in the Philippines, which then build his reputation in terms of people feeling comfortable with him doing pretty much anything he wants to do. He does a lot of these reflective pieces. That piece is in Orlando. The silver one with the people stretching with the boxes on their heads. These are kind of what I call escapes. I didn't know you see, this is actually the one that Maya Lin did at the federal courthouse in Miami. the STEAM project at the Miami Zoo, and then at the, I don't know what it's called now, whether it's still called the Civic Arena out there in Sunrise. I don't know what the actual name is, but Martha Schwartz did these light things that like kind of flying saucers in the plaza in front. Then there are benches. Here we see Kovacs again. We see the one on the right is by these really talented architects from San Juan, to Puerto Rican architects who have made lots of these benches with these forms and then these patterns on them. Now both of them, they split as a partnership, but now they both do primarily just murals rather than these kind of sculptural forms. The one at the bottom is by R&R Studios, two Argentinians who have a very successful career here in South Florida, making public arts, especially at weird scales. These are colored facades that are in Florida. On My Way, that's by R&R Studios. That's on Congress Avenue in Delray Beach. You have the one by Ivan Chermayeff, which is in the Chermayeff was one of the most prominent graphic artists in the United States during the 50s and the 60s, and this is his only piece of public art in the world. And then you have Christoph Mueller, his artwork I think I mentioned earlier. That one's in Tampa as a facade on the parking garage, covering the parking garage, a very popular place for public art these days. The Miami garages, both in the design district, primarily in the design district. The one in the bottom right is in Miami Beach. You can't see it well, but it spells out words. So it's like that game, that thing, Suka, where you curve some of the words, right? I don't, and then the one at you can see the faces, that's at the Miami Baseball Stadium parking garage, if you happen to be out there to see that. Broward has public art in some of its airports and terminals that are by architects. These are at the Miami airport. These are in downtown Jacksonville. This is also the tile mosaic. That's by the same team. This is Celso Gonzalez, the same team of Puerto Rican artists that are doing the tile mosaics. The one on the bottom right here that says Duval, I don't know if you know this, but the sports teams, for some reason, many years ago, a radio newscaster just started saying Duval like this, really long, you know, and so now if you go to any sports game, they'll do that. They'll just say Duval in this really way. So three young architects that were still in Harvard's program won this competition to do bike racks, and they created these bike racks, which if you look at them in one way, you can see the spelling of Duval in the connection. These are more projects in Boynton Beach by architects. Mark Fuller, actually, well, he's an industrial designer, actually, did the blue ones at the top, the parking garage and the seating area. You can see all of those if you go up to Boynton Beach. Here's Forness's work again. That's when you see the one in Tampa. The one that's in the convention center in Orlando in the ceiling. There is a new one of his going into Jacksonville. Should be done soon, I guess. Design Miami has always had a lot of temporary installations, which you could see during the design during Art Basel in terms of the installation work. They're no longer there. And the design district has a number of permanent public artworks, or they'll always have some new works that happen to be there when you're out in the design district. The bottom left one, that's a design by Buckminster Fuller that was never built. And the two guys that own the design district, that also redeveloped Lincoln Road, they said, oh, we have to do it. They just spend money on this stuff. They think it's fantastic. It's a good thing for millionaires to spend their money. And for some reason, the most popular animal in all the world to do sculpture is dogs. And here you see two in Florida. And then just to finish up, this is my favorite public artwork that I've ever seen in my life. This was by R&R Studios. It was in the Design District in an old place where they sold automobiles and became abandoned. And they made this thing called the living room that actually it was just painted out, the whole thing. It's still there, the shape, the concrete shape in the Design District.
Every now and then they like try to refurbish it and stuff, but you always have like people that vandalize it, unfortunately.
So, but I always thought it was a terrific piece, in terms of bringing the outside in, but doing it in a way which is converting the interior into publicness, given the scale of what it is, right? Made that happen and, much more before some of the other Japanese architects in you know, introducing the, flying giant, fabric or curtain, as part of the work. So, that's my little talk on, architects making